My name is Olivia Mercer. I am 34 years old, and my father ended our relationship in 11 seconds. I was still at my desk when the voicemail came through, and his voice was so flat, it sounded less like anger and more like a decision that had already been signed off somewhere behind my back. Don't come back. We're moving on without you. I played it twice because I honestly thought I had missed something. Maybe my name, maybe a reason, maybe one crack in his voice that proved he still remembered I was his daughter. There was nothing. No explanation. No fight. Just a clean cut. So I texted back one word. Okay. Then I moved faster than they thought I could. The family trust I had structured after my father's surgery was locked before my coffee went cold. The townhouse deal they were counting on for retirement was canceled before lunch. The shared support account that had somehow become everyone's private convenience fund was sealed behind my credentials by dinner. By the next morning, there were 46 missed calls, one message from an estate attorney saying we have a serious problem, and for the first time in years, I laughed without guilt. Because if my father wanted a future without me, then he was finally going to see what that future actually looked like when my money, my name, my credit, and my patience were no longer carrying it. Before I tell you what he said and what happened after I walked out, tell me this. What time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I want to see how far this story reaches before it all comes apart. People love to talk about family loyalty when they are standing on top of something you built. I did not learn that in one dramatic night. I learned it over 12 years of being the daughter who fixed things quietly. I worked as a senior licensing manager for a hospitality group that handled restaurant and boutique hotel expansions across 3 states. My job was contracts, compliance, deadlines, permits, signatures, the kind of work nobody notices until something collapses. That same role slowly became my position inside my family, too. When my father, Richard, tore his rotator cuff and could not work overtime anymore, I reorganized their debts. When medical bills stacked up, I created a family trust, so the money I was putting aside for their future would not be swallowed by panic spending. When my mother, Elaine, said they were tired of renting and wanted something small and warm for retirement, I structured a plan for a townhouse purchase in Scottsdale under strict terms. My money for the down payment, my credit on the file, my ownership until they paid their portion over time. My older sister Vanessa contributed opinions, emotional speeches, and absolutely nothing else that could survive an audit. She had a talent for drifting into a room after the hard part was done and making it sound like she had been part of the solution all along. For years, I ignored it because I was busy. I told myself competence was enough. It was not. Competence is useful, but in a family built around selective memory, usefulness can turn into entitlement, so gradually you do not notice until someone decides the machine should keep running without the person who built it. The voicemail did not blindside me because my father was cruel by nature. It blindsided me because I finally realized how easy it had become for all of them to confuse my support with an obligation. They had stopped seeing my help as a gift long before they decided to throw me out. They saw it as infrastructure. And when people think you are infrastructure, they do not imagine you can leave. They imagine you will absorb the damage and keep the lights on anyway. That was their mistake. My bigger mistake was not seeing the setup sooner, because the voicemail was not the start of the betrayal. It was only the first piece they said out loud. The calls started at 6:12 the next morning. My father first, then my mother, then 2 unknown numbers, then Vanessa, then the estate attorney, then my father again, as if repetition could turn panic into authority. I did not answer. I took a shower, put on a clean blazer, and went to work like the world had not cracked open the night before. That was the part that always unnerved people about me. When I was hurt, I did not become loud. I became organized. At 8:23, my mother texted me that I was overreacting. At 8:27, she sent another saying, nobody meant it the way it sounded. At 8:31, she texted, please call your father before he does something he cannot undo. I actually smiled at that, because what exactly did they think I had done? I had not screamed at them. I had not shown up at the house. I had not threatened anyone. I had simply removed myself from contracts, froze access to my own money, and forced their assumptions to meet reality. The estate attorney finally left the message that made me save the voicemail instead of deleting it. Olivia, this is Daniel Kessler. We have a serious problem with the trust hold and the canceled property file. Your parents believed there was an internal family understanding. Please call me back before this becomes more difficult. Internal family understanding. That was lawyer language for somebody made promises they had no right to make. By lunchtime, I got my first glimpse of how far the fiction had already spread. A cousin in Phoenix texted me, asking if I was okay and saying she heard I had been under a lot of pressure lately. An old family friend emailed to say she hoped I was not making drastic decisions from a place of burnout. Burnout. Pressure. Drastic decisions. The language was too polished to be spontaneous. Vanessa had started seasoning the story before the breakup was official. She was not telling people I was greedy. Not yet. She was telling them I had changed, that I had become controlling, that I had been saying strange things, that I was not thinking clearly. It was smart in an ugly way. Wild accusations invite resistance. Gentle concern slides under people's defenses. By the time my father called for the 10th time, I knew this was bigger than a single voicemail. Someone had spent weeks preparing them to see me not as the daughter holding everything together, but as the problem standing in the way of a simpler future. And in my family, there was only one person who could lie that softly and still sound helpful. Vanessa finally texted me late that night. I hope you are proud of yourself. No punctuation, no explanation, just enough venom to confirm what I already suspected. I did not respond right away. Instead, I opened the document folder I had not touched in months and started rebuilding a timeline. Receipts, wire confirmations, email threads, draft contracts, notes from property calls, access records for the support account. Then I called someone I trusted more than anyone attached to my family. Martin Sloan had been our accountant for more than a decade before Vanessa convinced my parents to switch to a younger advisory firm she described as more current and more collaborative. Martin was the kind of man who never raised his voice and never wasted a sentence. When I met him the next afternoon, he looked over the trust paperwork and asked me one question that made my stomach drop. Did someone recently imply they expected your approval role to end? I stared at him and asked why. He folded his hands and said, because I received a discreet inquiry 3 weeks ago about what would happen if the acting contributor became unreliable or emotionally compromised. Those were the exact words. Unreliable or emotionally compromised. Not dead. Not unavailable. Compromised. I felt something cold slide into place inside me. 3 weeks ago. Before the voicemail. Before the calls, before my father told me not to come back. Someone had already been exploring how to get around me. Martin would not speculate, but he did not need to. Vanessa had been building a transition plan while smiling at family dinners and asking me whether I thought desert property values would keep rising. The next proof came by accident. The real estate agent handling the Scottsdale townhouse emailed me a revised cancellation notice and accidentally included a prior reply thread. Vanessa had written to her earlier that morning trying to salvage the purchase without me. She claimed I had stepped away due to emotional instability and was no longer able to handle financial stress without lashing out at family. I read that line 3 times. Emotional instability. That was her play. Turn me from architect into liability. Make my father believe he was protecting the family by pushing me out. Make outsiders think my withdrawal proved her story. Make herself look like the calm daughter stepping in to help. I forwarded the full thread to my attorney and then to Daniel Kessler, the estate attorney, who had left the message. Beneath it, I wrote one line. This is why your clients have a serious problem. He called me inside 20 minutes. His voice was careful now, stripped of that earlier assumption that this was a family misunderstanding. Ms. Mercer, I think we need to discuss whether your sister represented facts that cannot be supported. That was the nearest any lawyer would come to saying someone had lied through their teeth without a formal accusation. And that was the moment I stopped thinking about damage control. I started thinking about exposure. Not just proving I was innocent, making them all sit still long enough to hear what they had chosen to believe. My father sent the message that opened the door. Please. 5 minutes. No yelling. We were told things. That phrase mattered more than he realized. We were told things. Not we know. Not you did this. Told. I answered with a time and one instruction. Tomorrow at 7. Everyone at the house. No excuses. Bring every version you were given. I will bring documents. When I walked into my parents' dining room the next evening, the room felt staged for a funeral nobody had agreed to name. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table like he still believed posture could hold the family together. My mother, Elaine, looked exhausted, hands folded too tightly in her lap. Vanessa sat across from me, polished and cold, chin lifted, eyes already rehearsing innocence. I did not sit down right away. I laid out the first document in silence. Proof of the down payment transfer for the townhouse. The second, my signed escrow documents. The third, trust formation records showing who funded it, who controlled temporary disbursement authority, and why. The fourth, support account statements documenting grocery runs, boutique purchases, subscription services, and restaurant tabs that were never part of emergency support. Then I put down the printout from the real estate agent, the one where Vanessa had described me as emotionally unstable. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Vanessa tried first. She said everyone was under stress and people were reading too much into wording. So I put down Martin Sloan's written summary of the inquiry he had received 3 weeks before the voicemail, asking how the trust would function if I became unreliable or emotionally compromised. My mother looked up so fast her chair scraped the floor. 3 weeks ago, she whispered. My father turned to Vanessa. She started talking immediately, too fast, saying she had only been trying to prepare for every possibility because I had been distant and sharp and hard to talk to. I asked one question. When exactly did I say I wanted to cut Mom and Dad out? Silence. She blinked. Then she said after dinner one night in the car. My father frowned. We drove separately that night, he said. I watched the lie hit the table and die there. Vanessa pivoted, saying maybe she had the night wrong but not the substance. So I asked another question. When did I ever tell you I wanted control of everything? She looked at my mother now. Not me. Elaine's face had gone pale. That was the first moment she understood what had happened. Not an argument. Not a misunderstanding. A story had been fed to them in layers until exile felt justified. My father's voice was low when he finally asked Vanessa if she told people I was unstable. She said she had been concerned. Concerned. That word again. The coward's shield. I leaned forward then and spoke more quietly than anyone expected. You did not protect them from me. You tried to replace me with their permission. Nobody moved. Nobody defended her. The room had that terrible stillness families reach only when the wrong child finally has proof. I did not yell. That unsettled them more than anger would have. I simply kept going, because calm is merciless when the evidence is already doing the damage for you. I showed my father the chain of messages from relatives repeating versions of Vanessa's story. I showed my mother the timeline proving the quiet smear campaign began before the voicemail. I showed Daniel Kessler's follow-up email confirming that any attempt to alter trust direction without my consent had no legal standing and raised serious compliance concerns. By then, Vanessa had shifted from defiant to wounded, which was exactly where she always went when the script slipped away from her. She said she was being painted as a villain for trying to hold the family together. She said I had always made everyone feel small because I handled the money and the paperwork and the planning. She said maybe none of this would have happened if I had been easier to love. My mother actually gasped. That line was meant for me, but it landed on both of them too, because suddenly the whole table could see what she had really resented. Not my control, my reliability. I had become the standard she could not meet, and the gate she could not get past, so she tried to turn my competence into suspicion. My father stood up so quickly his chair tipped backward. He looked at Vanessa with a kind of stunned disgust I had never seen on his face before. Did you tell me my daughter wanted us ruined? Did you tell me she met with lawyers to push us out? Did you tell me she said we were dead weight? Vanessa started crying then, but even that felt strategic, too late and too neat. She reached for my mother first, of course, but Elaine stepped back. It was a small movement, barely more than a lean away, yet it changed the entire room. My mother had finally stopped protecting the wrong person. My father asked Vanessa to leave. She refused. He asked again, harder this time. When she still did not move, he called my brother-in-law Tyler, who arrived 15 minutes later looking like a man who already knew his marriage had been built on omissions. He did not make a scene. He simply listened to enough, took one long look at his wife, and told her they were going home. She turned to me at the door and said this was not over. I believed her. Manipulators never think the story ends when they lose. They think it becomes unfair. The moment the front door closed, my mother began to cry for real. Not dramatic tears. Not the careful kind meant to redirect sympathy. This was the sound of a woman realizing she had helped exile the child who had been carrying her future. My father did not cry. He looked at me and said the words I had needed and hated in equal measure. I was wrong. I let someone else tell me who my daughter was. Then he sat down across from me like he had aged 5 years in an hour and asked what it would take to fix what could still be fixed. That was the question I had been waiting for, because forgiveness was never going to be the price. Structure was. I did not go back to the old arrangement. That would have made everything they put me through meaningless. Instead, I gave them terms. Clear ones. Legal ones. Terms built to survive tears, guilt, and future revisionist history. The Scottsdale townhouse would move forward only under my sole ownership. Richard and Elaine Mercer would receive notarized lifetime residency rights, full occupancy, no rent, no surprise removal, no dependence on Vanessa's goodwill, and no opening for her to claim equitable interest later. The trust would be rebuilt with narrower language, automatic audit triggers, and a clause permanently excluding any family member who attempted misrepresentation to redirect control or access. Vanessa would not merely be taken off current paperwork. She would be cut out of any pathway that could later turn emotional pressure into legal leverage. The support account would never reopen as a shared free for all. Instead, I would cover agreed essentials directly through scheduled payments I controlled. No cards, no casual transfers, no mystery spending hidden under family need. My father agreed before I finished the second page. My mother cried again when she saw Vanessa's exclusion clause, but this time she signed anyway. 3 days later, Daniel Kessler filed the revised trust documents. 2 days after that, I re-entered the townhouse purchase on corrected terms. My name only. My money only. My rules at last stated openly instead of assumed quietly. Vanessa found out the way I wanted her to find out, through public records and silence. She called me 12 times in one afternoon. I never answered. Then came the texts. You stole my family. You poisoned them against me. You think money makes you powerful. I saved the messages and sent them straight to my attorney. Tyler filed for separation 2 weeks later after learning this was not the first story she had manipulated to gain access to something that was not hers. Relatives stopped taking her calls when the timelines no longer matched and the sympathy no longer stuck. By the end of the month, the woman who had tried to inherit my role was renting a small apartment alone, shut out of the trust, shut out of the house, shut out of every financial structure she thought she could slide into once I was gone. My father did something I never thought I would see. He left me a voicemail of his own, and this time his voice shook. Olivia, please come back. Not because we need the money. Because I know now what I threw away when I let her speak for you. I listened to it once in my car outside the title office after signing the final ownership documents. Then I looked at my name on the file and understood something that took me 34 years to learn. Being invited back is not the same as belonging. I did come back eventually, but not as the daughter who absorbed the damage and kept everyone comfortable. I came back as the woman who wrote the terms, locked the doors, and made sure the next person they moved on without was never going to be me. The cleanest revenge is not spectacle, it is permanence. A month after my father's voicemail, the farmhouse on Lake Norman finally closed. I drove out there alone the morning after signing, parked in the gravel drive, and sat behind the wheel for a full minute looking at the white porch, the blue shutters, The line of trees beyond the back fence, and the small strip of water visible through them like a promise you could almost touch. My mother had wanted the porch swing. My father had wanted the workshop in the detached garage. I had wanted, stupidly, for helping them to still mean something warm and mutual. Instead, I got something colder and more durable. Clarity. My parents moved in that weekend. There was no celebration, no family photos, no performative speech about fresh starts. Just boxes, a rented truck, my father assembling shelves in silence, and my mother wiping down kitchen counters that were already clean because she did not know what else to do with her hands. I gave them a folder containing their residence agreement, emergency procedures, updated medication reimbursement process, and a plain English explanation of what the new trust rules meant. My father read every page. My mother asked twice whether I really needed such strict protections. I answered the same way both times. You needed me. You just didn't think that meant you had to protect me, too. After that, she stopped asking. Weeks passed. The calls changed. Instead of panicked demands and vague guilt, I got practical questions about utilities, insurance, and doctors near the lake. My father grew quieter, but not in the punishing way I remembered from childhood. In the humbled way of a man realizing that authority without judgment is just noise. He apologized properly one evening while we were sorting tool bins in the garage. No speeches, no grand redemption arc. He said I was wrong, and I chose the easy story because it protected my pride. I said, I know. He nodded once, like that hurt and helped at the same time. My mother's apology came slower because women like her often confuse peacekeeping with innocence. It took her longer to admit that standing by while one child is sacrificed to keep the room calm is still a choice. But eventually she did. She said she had wanted so badly to believe Gavin needed protecting that she had not considered I might be the one being targeted. That was the first apology from her that actually sounded expensive. Gavin, meanwhile, burned fast. A mutual family friend told me he had tried to pitch a business idea to two cousins and an uncle, some half-formed plan involving mobile detailing and branded merchandise, and asked each of them for startup money while painting himself as the son unfairly cut off by a controlling sister. Nobody bit. He had already told too many versions of the story. In one, I was greedy. In another, unstable. In another, vindictive, because I hated seeing him close to our parents. Liars always forget that consistency is part of credibility. By the time he tried to gather sympathy, the facts had outrun him. Melissa had stopped taking his calls. Eric Sloan wanted no further involvement beyond closing out the earlier mess. Martin had documented every protective revision. Even extended family members who had once bought the performance started asking why every disaster in Gavin's life required someone else's credit score. 3 months later, my mother told me he was renting a small duplex outside Huntersville and working unpredictable hours for a friend's landscaping company. She said it like she wanted me to hear tragedy. I heard adulthood. He had a roof. He had work. He had the exact amount of support he had once argued everyone should learn to live with. None. One Sunday afternoon, after we had lived with the new arrangement long enough for it to feel normal, my father handed me his phone and said there was something I should hear. Gavin had left him a voicemail. It was full of injured righteousness at first, then bargaining, then a crack in the voice right near the end where the truth finally showed through. He said, Dad, I just need someone to believe me for once. I handed the phone back and almost laughed at the cruelty of how precisely he had described what he'd taken from me. My father deleted the message without replaying it. We stood in the garage a second longer than necessary. Then he said, very quietly, I should have believed you before it cost this much. That was it. Not cinematic. Not neat. Just true. It did cost that much. It cost me the last illusions I had about what love automatically protects. It cost my parents the fantasy that they could enjoy my stability while entertaining his sabotage. It cost Gavin the access he thought he was entitled to, and that was the ending that mattered most. Not that I won the house. Not that the trust was back under my control. Not even that the family lawyer had once emailed we have a serious problem and had been absolutely right. What mattered was this. The door my father slammed shut with that voicemail did not reopen the way he expected. I did come back, but not as the daughter who could be dismissed and then summoned when the paperwork went bad. I came back as the person who wrote the rules this time. The house is protected. My parents are protected. The trust is audit locked. My phone is quiet. Gavin has no route in. And if you ask me whether I forgive them, the answer is more complicated than people like. I support my parents. I speak to them. I see them. I do not trust them the way I once did. And that is not bitterness. That is memory with boundaries. My father told me not to come back. By morning, there were 46 missed calls and a lawyer begging me to fix what my absence had broken. I laughed because for the first time in my life, the family emergency was no longer mine to absorb. It was theirs to survive. And they only did because I allowed it on terms none of them will ever control again.